A long time ago, the Avatar kept peace between the four nations, but the Avatar disappeared 100 years ago. Since then, the Fire Nation started a war to take over the others, and many lost hope the Avatar would ever return. Even the southern water tribe village, Wolf Cove, was affected, and the men went to war, leaving women and children behind. Sokka and his sister Katara are the oldest kids there. The episode starts with Sokka and Katara fishing in a canoe. Katara uses her waterbending to catch a fish, but Sokka ruins it by trying to spear it, making the fish fall back in the water and soaking himself. He blames Katara's magic water, but she says it's just waterbending, and before they argue more, strong currents pull them toward ice chunks. Katara tells Sokka to steer left, but the canoe gets stuck and crushed, leaving them stranded on the ice. Katara gets mad at Sokka for not listening when she told him to steer left, and Sokka says if she didn't like his steering, she should have used her waterbending to fix it. Katara gets even angrier, calls him sexist and immature, and while yelling about everything she does for him, she accidentally uses her bending and cracks a huge iceberg, which falls into the ocean. Then, a glowing iceberg rises from the water, and inside, Katara sees someone trapped in the ice. Sokka warns her to stay back, but she grabs his club and hits the iceberg, and a burst of air blasts her back. The ice cracks open, and a bright light shoots into the sky. Far away, Prince Zuko, a teenage Fire Nation prince, sees the light from his ship. He has been searching for the Avatar for 2 years. His uncle Iroh says it's probably nothing, but Zuko believes it's the Avatar and tells his crew to head toward it. As Katara and Sokka approach the iceberg, they find a young boy with arrow marks on his head and hands, and he collapses into Katara's arms. When he opens his eyes, he sees Katara and asks what's going on. Sokka demands to know how he got trapped in the ice, but the boy says he doesn't remember. He introduces himself as Aang, an airbender from the Air Nomads, a group believed to have been wiped out 100 years ago. Aang also shows them his flying bison, Appa, but Sokka doesn't believe it can fly, and seeing their canoe is gone, Aang offers to take them back to their village. Meanwhile, on the ship, Iroh tells Zuko to rest and not get his hopes up. He warns Zuko that like his ancestors, he might fail to catch the Avatar, but Zuko refuses to give up. Later, Aang falls asleep on Appa and dreams about getting caught in a storm and crashing into the ocean, where he was frozen in ice. He wakes up in a tent in Katara's village, Wolf Cove, and Katara notices his arrow tattoos. Aang meets the rest of the village, which only has women and children. He also meets Gran, Katara and Sokka's grandmother, who is shocked to see an airbender and says they were thought to be extinct for the last 100 years, leaving Aang confused and surprised. The village toddlers quickly take a liking in Aang, and he happily plays with them, even showing off his flying staff. The kids are amazed as he uses it to fly, but Sokka gets annoyed, thinking Aang is distracting the kids from his military training. Later, Katara and Aang goes to a snowy area full of otter penguins. Katara asks Aang to teach her waterbending, but he admits he doesn't know how, he only knows airbending. Since there are no waterbenders left in the southern water tribe, Aang offers to take her to the northern water tribe to find a teacher. The two then go penguin sledding for fun, and while sliding, they come across an abandoned Fire Nation ship. Katara warns Aang not to go inside, but he convinces her to explore it with him. Inside, the ship is filled with old weapons, and when Katara mentions the 100-year war, Aang looks confused. He says he has friends in every nation, even the Fire Nation, and doesn't know about any war. Katara asks how long he was in the iceberg, and Aang guesses just a few days, but Katara tells him it's probably been around 100 years, which shocks him. As they are about to leave, Aang accidentally triggers a flare signal. Prince Zuko, already nearby and suspicious that the Avatar is close, sees the flare and heads straight for it. When Aang and Katara return to the village, Sokka angrily blames Aang for alerting the Fire Nation and banishes him. Upset by Sokka's decision, Katara says she will leave with Aang, but Aang tells her not to. He doesn't want to come between her and her family. With the Fire Nation ship approaching, Sokka quickly prepares the village kids for battle. Meanwhile, Aang spots Zuko's ship from a nearby ice ridge and decides to return and protect the village, leaving Appa behind. Both Sokka and Zuko get ready for the coming fight. Zuko puts on his Fire Nation armor and helmet, while Sokka gears up with his weapons and paints his face for battle. Zuko's ship arrives at Wolf Cove, smashing through Sokka's flimsy defenses. Sokka bravely stands his ground but steps back as the ramp lowers and Zuko and his soldiers step out. Sokka charges with a basic weapon, but Zuko easily defeats him using only his hands. Zuko demands to know where the Avatar is, expecting someone old, and when Sokka attacks again, Zuko knocks him down again. Sokka manages one lucky shot with his boomerang, hitting Zuko's helmet, but it only makes Zuko angrier. Just as Zuko is about to attack with firebending, Aang arrives riding an otter penguin and knocks Zuko over. He uses airbending to blast snow at Zuko and his men. Zuko is shocked to see that the Avatar is just a 12-year-old boy, and realizing his identity, Zuko attacks. Aang defends himself with airbending, but when he sees the danger to the villagers, he asks Zuko if surrendering will keep them safe. Zuko agrees, and his soldiers take Aang prisoner. Katara tries to stop him, but it is too late. Aang is taken aboard the ship, and they sail away toward the Fire Nation. Later that day, Katara begs Sokka to help rescue Aang. At first, Sokka snaps at her, but then points to a small canoe he has already prepared, and Katara realizes he is on board. Gran walks up and asks what their plan is, and when they don't have one, she gives them sleeping bags and says they'll need them. She thanks Katara for bringing hope and tells Sokka to be kinder to his sister. Gran says their destinies are now tied to Aang's since they were the ones who found him. Katara looks at the canoe and admits it won't be fast enough to catch the ship. Just then, Appa appears over a hill, growling. Katara runs toward him excitedly, and Sokka realizes they'll be riding the flying bison to rescue Aang. On Zuko's ship, he looks at Aang's staff and thinks it would be a good gift for his father, and he tells the guards to lock Aang up and take the staff to his room. As they walk, Aang jokes that he could beat them even with his hands tied. When a guard tells him to shut up, Aang uses airbending to knock both guards away and escapes. He runs onto the deck, using airbending to move through the ship, and a guard sees him and yells that the Avatar has escaped. Meanwhile, Katara and Sokka follow the ship on Appa, who is slowly swimming. Katara tries to get Appa to fly while Sokka yells random commands. Finally, Sokka remembers Aang's phrase and says, "Yip yip." Appa growls and takes off into the air, flying fast. Sokka gets excited, but his smile fades a little when he sees Katara smirking at him. Aang runs through the ship, dodging guards and using airbending to escape and disarm them. He even uses a helmet to cut off his restraints. He finds his staff in Zuko's room, but Zuko is waiting, and they fight, with Aang dodging flames and using a tapestry to trap Zuko. Aang grabs his staff and knocks Zuko down with a mattress. With Zuko stuck, Aang escapes, leaving the prince furious and embarrassed. Aang reaches the ship's bridge and tries to escape with his glider, but Zuko grabs him, pulling them both back to the deck. They prepare to fight again, but Appa suddenly appears, shocking Zuko. As Aang defends himself with airbending, Zuko blasts him with fire. Aang is knocked out and falls into the freezing ocean. As Aang sinks into the ocean, Katara cries out, and suddenly, Aang's eyes glow white as he enters the Avatar state. In a massive display of power, Aang rises from the sea on a huge column of water. Zuko, Katara, and Sokka watch in awe at his strength. Aang uses the water to wash Zuko and the soldiers off the ship, and when the water recedes, Zuko falls into the ocean. Appa lands on the deck, and Aang collapses, exhausted from the effort. Sokka grabs Aang's staff, but Zuko beats him to it, but Sokka uses the staff to knock Zuko back into the water. Meanwhile, Katara freezes some approaching soldiers with waterbending, and the trio escapes on Appa, just as Iroh arrives to help Zuko back onto the ship. Iroh and Zuko fire a blast at Appa, but Aang deflects it, sending it into an ice wall. The impact triggers an avalanche that damages Zuko's ship. Appa flies away, with Katara, Sokka, and Aang laughing as they finally escape. Furious over Aang's escape, Zuko vows never to underestimate him again. He orders his crew to dig out the ship and pursue Aang, but most of his crew is either frozen or busy helping the others, putting them at a disadvantage. As Appa flies into the sunset, Katara asks Aang how he was able to perform such powerful waterbending earlier, but Aang admits he doesn't know how he did it. Katara also asks why Aang didn't tell her he was the Avatar when she asked him before. Aang explains that he didn't want to be the Avatar and felt it was something forced upon him. Katara reminds Aang that the world needs him to master the bending arts and suggests they find a waterbending teacher at the North Pole. Aang gets excited by the idea and suggests they both learn waterbending together, and eager to fight firebenders, Sokka decides to join them. The trio agrees to head to the northern tribe, but Aang suggests they make a few stops along the way, and the episode ends. The episode begins with Aang and Katara packing up their campsite. Aang talks excitedly about going back to the Southern Air Temple, his old home, though Katara worries that evidence of the Fire Nation's assault on it may upset him. Sokka is still in his sleeping bag and doesn't want to get up, and Aang tricks him by pretending there is a prickle snake in the bag. Sokka jumps up scared, but falls over and realizes it was a joke, and Katara tries not to laugh. Aang says they can leave now since Sokka is awake. Meanwhile, Prince Zuko arrives at Kitu Harbor in the Earth Kingdom to fix his badly damaged ship after fighting Aang. He wants the repairs done fast so they don't lose track of the Avatar, and Zuko tells his uncle Iroh not to mention the Avatar to avoid attracting attention. Commander Zhao greets them and says he has been promoted, and he notices the ship's damage and asks what happened. Zuko and Iroh lie, saying they hit an Earth Kingdom ship, but Zhao doesn't believe them but invites them for a drink. As they get close to the Patola Mountains, Sokka gets upset when he finds out Aang used all his seal jerky to start the campfire. Katara tries to prepare Aang for the idea that his people might be gone, but Aang doesn't believe it. He thinks the Fire Nation couldn't have reached the Air Temple without a flying bison. When they reach the top of the mountain, they finally see the Southern Air Temple below the clouds. While having tea in his tent, Commander Zhao tells Zuko and Iroh about the Fire Nation's plan to take over the Earth Kingdom. Zuko doubts the plan and says his father is foolish to think it will be easy, and Zhao then asks about Zuko's hunt for the Avatar. Zuko says he hasn't found him yet. Zhao doesn't believe him and keeps pushing for answers, and after a tense moment, Zuko tries to leave, but Zhao's guards block him. Then a soldier enters and says Zuko's crew told him they had the Avatar but let him go. Sokka complains about being hungry, and Katara scolds him for only thinking about food at the Airbender Temple. Aang gives them a tour but feels sad when he sees no other airbenders. To cheer him up, Sokka plays airball with Aang but gets knocked into the snow, and there, he finds an old Fire Nation helmet. Katara sees it too, and they decide to show Aang, but before he reaches them, Katara hides the helmet with snow and tells Aang she just wanted to show him her snowbending. Aang believes Katara's lie and compliments her snowbending, and he excitedly continues the tour, wanting to show more of the temple. Once he is out of earshot, Sokka tells Katara it's wrong to hide the truth from Aang, but Katara sadly says that learning the Fire Nation attacked his home would break his heart. They follow Aang and reach a statue of an airbender, and Aang introduces him as Monk Gyatso. In a flashback, Monk Gyatso is teaching Aang how to make fruit pies, but Aang isn't very interested. Aang says he thinks the monks made a mistake choosing him as the Avatar. Gyatso comforts him, saying the only mistake was telling him too early. He tells Aang to focus on the present and says that when Aang is old enough to enter the sanctuary, he'll meet someone who will help him grow as the Avatar. Feeling better, Aang helps Gyatso airbend the pies onto the heads of meditating monks. Lemurs rush in to lick the pies, and Aang and Gyatso laugh at their prank. Back in the present, Aang heads toward the Air Temple Sanctuary, remembering Gyatso's words about someone inside who could help him, and he tells Katara and Sokka he is ready to meet that person. Katara doubts anyone could survive alone for 100 years, but Aang points out that he did. Aang hopes the person inside can teach him more about being the Avatar. Thinking there might be food inside, especially meat, Sokka runs at the doors but fails to open them. Aang uses airbending to unlock the doors, and they slowly open. He enters the dark temple, with Katara and Sokka close behind. Meanwhile, Zhao mocks Zuko for losing to a 12-year-old and calls him pathetic, and Zuko angrily says he only underestimated Aang once and won't do it again. Zhao ignores him and says he'll take over the Avatar hunt, calling Zuko just a kid. Enraged, Zuko tries to attack him but is held back by guards. Inside the sanctuary, they find hundreds of statues, and Sokka become upset that there is no food. Aang and Katara notice the statues follow the order of the Avatar cycle: air, water, earth, and fire, and Katara realizes they're all past avatars. Aang's past lives. Aang stops in front of the last statue and stares into its eyes, entering a trance. Katara gently shakes him out of it, and Aang says the statue is Avatar Roku, the avatar before him. Suddenly, the group hears a humming noise from the entrance, signaling someone is near, so they hide behind the statues, thinking it's a firebender. Sokka jumps out to surprise the intruder, but when Aang and Katara peek, they see it's just a lemur. Still hungry, Sokka wants to eat it, while Aang wants to keep it as a pet, and the two race to catch the lemur, with Katara staying behind. As they chase it, the lemur flies out the window, and Aang jumps after it, determined to catch it. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao returns to his tent and tells Zuko and Iroh that he is preparing to search for the Avatar. He adds that once his ship leaves, Zuko and Iroh will be released, and still furious, Zuko insists he'll capture the Avatar before Zhao can. Zhao mocks him, saying a banished prince can't compete with him and his warships. He then insults Zuko, saying Fire Lord Ozai sees him as a failure, using his scar as proof, and enraged, Zuko challenges Zhao to an Agni Kai at sunset. Iroh reminds Zuko of his last duel with a firebending master, and Zuko vows to never forget that fight. Meanwhile, Aang chases the lemur into a ruined tent and is horrified to find the bodies of Fire Nation soldiers scattered in the snow. As he walks deeper into the tent, he discovers the skeleton of monk Gyatso, his former master and father figure. Overcome with grief, Aang collapses to the ground in tears. Still searching for the lemur, Sokka finally catches up and naively asks if Aang caught it. However, he soon notices the skeletons and realizes the gravity of the situation. Attempting to comfort Aang, Sokka is startled when Aang suddenly enters the Avatar state. Inside the temple sanctuary, Katara watches in disbelief as the eyes of the Avatar statues, including Roku's, begin to glow white. Meanwhile, across the world, similar events unfold at the Avatar temples in the other nations. The statues and murals at each temple begin to glow spontaneously, signaling a global response to Aang's awakening. In the Crescent Island Fire Temple, the Fire Sages prepare to report the return of the Avatar to the Fire Lord. Still in the Avatar state, Aang summons a powerful windstorm around him, which knocks Sokka off his feet. Struggling against the gale, Katara calls out to Sokka, asking what happened. He yells back that Aang found out firebenders killed Gyatso, and Katara pushes forward, determined to calm him down. As the sun sets, Zhao and Zuko stand in a courtyard, preparing to duel, and they slowly turn to face each other. Zuko strikes first, launching a flurry of fire blasts, but Zhao dodges effortlessly. As Zuko pauses to catch his breath, Iroh again reminds him to return to the basics. Bai Zhao counters with his own blasts. Zuko blocks them but is steadily pushed back, and Zhao lands a solid hit, sending Zuko to the ground. He leaps forward to finish the fight, aiming a blast at Zuko's face, but Zuko rolls away, springs up, and kicks Zhao off balance. Zhao braces for the final blow, but Zuko deliberately strikes the ground beside him. When Zhao calls him a coward, Zuko warns him not to get in his way again. As he turns to walk off, Zhao launches a sneak attack, but Iroh intercepts, catching the fire with his bare hand and throwing Zhao down. Iroh scolds Zhao for his dishonor and praises Zuko, saying that even in exile, he has shown greater honor. Katara shouts over the wind, trying to comfort Aang. She tells him that she lost her mother too, and even though his people are gone, he now has a new family, her and Sokka. Aang begins to calm down and slowly floats back to the ground. Sokka joins them and promises they'll protect him. Katara takes Aang's hand, and he finally leaves the Avatar state. Aang admits that Katara was right about the Fire Nation's attack. He realizes the other temples must have fallen too, and now he truly is the last airbender. Later, Aang, Katara, and Sokka stand in the sanctuary, and Aang looks at Roku's statue and wonders how a past life can help him. Katara reassures him, saying, "You'll find a way," and just then, the lemur returns with fruit and gives it to Sokka, who quickly eats. The lemur climbs onto Aang's shoulder. Later, Aang looks out at the empty temple with Appa and the lemur. He says they are the only ones left and must stick together, and he tells Katara and Sokka that the lemur is now part of their team. Katara asks for its name, and the lemur steals Sokka's moon peach and brings it to Aang. Aang laughs and names him Momo, and when Sokka tries to eat, he realizes the peach is gone, and everyone laughs. That night, the group leaves the temple on Appa, and still feeling sad, Aang leans against a pack and looks back one last time at his old home as it disappears into the clouds, and the episode ends.